So our next one is for Dr. Duffy. Are people with HD lonely? It seems like my wife is fine not having social interactions like she used to, but I'm not sure if she's just not talking to me about it because it hurts her that her friends do not come around anymore.
Yeah, this is a complex question. And I would love to hear Dr. Donath's and Lisa's comments as well, actually. So maybe we can piggyback on one another. Everybody gets lonely. That's just being human. And I think that we have to appreciate the human experience of living life, and then B, the human experience of living life with a disease that strips us of a lot of who we are and our independence, um, a disease that we've experienced through generation after generation. So it didn't just start with the individual, but it started generations before that, and what that unique experience has been like, what the individual experience is like for the patient, and what it's like for the family. All of that because of the kind of beast that HD is. It is rare. And in our world, obviously not as rare, but rare. And you create worlds like Katrina and Katie do to create worlds to support individuals who are living with HD and JOHD, because it can be really lonely out there, and it can be hard to find other people that are experiencing similar things that you are, in terms of historically the history of you and the current experiences that you're experiencing. So that in itself can be lonely. However, what I will also say is, as the disease progresses, oftentimes we lose our loved one to the disease a little bit. They get lost in the disease. And it's not uncommon for us to worry, are they depressed? Are they anxious? Are they sad? Are they lonely? Because they're just not interacting like they did. They're not as talkative. They're not as socially engaged. They're not as participatory in or engaged in our family activities, in our day-to-day life. And they're just retreating into their disease a little bit. And that's part of the disease in itself. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're lonely or that they're sad. They might not be able to express themselves in their face, right? They might not be able to show emotion as well, which is very common. They get very flat and less expressive. And they might not verbally be able to express themselves as well. They can't say, I feel sad, or I feel lonely, or I feel depressed. Like, those words are harder to come by. And we often interpret, right? We interpret facial expressions, body gestures, people's social interactions, and we come to the conclusion they must be sad or depressed or lonely, and that might not be the case. And oftentimes we spend time, hey, just let's check in with the patient first. Like, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? Are you sad? Do you feel blue? Are there days where, you just feel like you want to cry? Like, exploring the language around that. And it's not uncommon for them to have that, but it's also not uncommon for them to say, no, I feel fine. They just don't have kind of that they've had previously. And so their personality and gets a little bit lost there, unfortunately, into the disease. So I'd be just take pause and thinking what all those experiences might be like for that individual, and knowing that they could be just fine and actually really content and happy, and that you're providing great caregiving, love, and support, and they are just a little bit more quiet and retreated into themselves, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I would agree. I think people's social desire, if that's even a good term, but their desire to be social changes when you have a neurological disease. If maybe they were into big parties before with lots of stuff going on, lots of activities, lots of noise, what we call extra outside stimuli or chaos in some cases. And maybe they really thrived in those environments before, but more when their neurological disease progresses, something like Huntington's disease, they may still want social interaction, but they want it in a different way. Being in a large party with lots of outside stimuli is going to be too much and too tiring for them. And they aren't going to be able to enjoy it the same way they did because their brain is just on overload. So I always say, think of a child at Christmas morning. As parents, we want to create this wonderful Christmas experience. And then They usually have tantrums and meltdowns, and you're just like, why did we do this? They only like the boxes anyways. It's sort of these things, but it's overstimulation. And that's what happens when you have neurological conditions, especially Huntington's disease. So I think it's just about the social interaction changing. I don't know if I would say that they're necessarily lonely, but do they feel like people maybe don't understand? Yes. Do they maybe feel like they miss their friends and the people that aren't coming over? Absolutely. So if you can find other ways to help the friends, because a lot of times friends don't come over because they don't want to be a burden or they don't want to add stress to you. So maybe what Katie and Katrina, Katie and Katrina sent out as far as like how people can help is asking people like, hey, would you mind coming over every week and just sitting with her for 30 minutes when you can talk about old times, or you can talk about your kids or your grandbabies or whatever it is? And 30 minutes really isn't that long, but it's going to be an ample amount of time for someone with Huntington's disease and a very little amount of time for that friend. So it's not going to be super burdensome to their life either. At times, Huntington's patients are perfectly content being in a quiet room watching the same movie over and over because they know what to expect and they can follow it. I think those are all things to consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Dr.
good
Donath,
point.
can you talk about apathy?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think everything that's been said, I'm in full support of and completely agree. I think one other big symptom that I see in patients with HD and loved ones is this idea of apathy, this disengagement with either families or friends or previous activities that they used to be engaged in. And this is it can be a progression of HD, but it could also be just regular aging as well, maturity. There's lots of different reasons to be disengaged with previous activity, but when it becomes global is when we start to brainstorm and think about ways that we can better connect the patient and the loved one with people and activities and these kind of things. And I'll just share, like, outside of Huntington's clinics, this is a symptom that we are talking about in psychiatry on a global scale. I think we look at how the world has changed pre and post pandemic, and loneliness is one of the symptoms that has just exponentially exploded within, I think, all communities. And I'll just share that even if you have lots of loved ones caring and visiting and spending time with the patient, they can still feel lonely. And really, it's the lack of connection, which can stem from things like depression and apathy and disengagement. And so how we work around that is really challenging. There's no medicines to fix that. And so we have to be creative in working individually with families.
Thank you for relating it to the general public. I think that's super important. And I also, that feeling of being lonely in a room full of people, I have related with. And so it's just, I'm also glad that was mentioned because I don't think a lot of people realize that's a thing. It's pretty common.
Real quick to plug Help for HD again, because we'll do that all day. We throw awesome events and they are so much fun. We always have DJs and we have, I know that's, we're talking about stimuli, but we bring it a little bit. We have flashing lights, because we get together only a couple times a year as a community and we throw a party full of support and community and love. And I know that a couple of our friends, their trips every year is to come to a Help for HD event because their loved one this is the place I feel loved, accepted. I feel like I can be myself. If I drop something, everyone just goes, okay, like someone needs to wipe it down. Okay. Because we can be anything we are. Korea, anything going on, psychiatric, cognitive impairment, the delayed, that's all of our normal. This is us. If you find like my loved one, we don't go to parties anymore. We used to love going to parties, but now we're uncomfortable because of different symptoms. Come to us because you will have so much fun. And we offer scholarships to help stay the night. We offer these things for our community. So if you find that you feel like your loved one wants a party, we will throw one 4 times a year. And they're awesome.
Real quick, I want to make sure I'm enunciating correctly. Donath or Donath? Thank you.
Yeah, it's like don't ask. Yeah.
Donath. Oh, now I'm going to say Donath. Doctor, don't ask. Oh, man. Got to make that right in my head. Okay. So let's go to your next question. My husband stays up all night pacing the house. It seems like he can't sit still ever. Is there anything to help with this? It is the hardest to deal with at night when we're all trying to sleep.
Again, another common symptom that we talk about, especially in collaboration in our HD clinic. I think the first thing is that restlessness, needing to move, feeling like you have an Energizer bunny running at all times. This can be a symptom of HD. And so wanting to make sure that if this is choreiform or other motor restlessness that's being managed either medically or physical therapy or collaboration. The other thing that I often speak with patients about is nighttime is actually the only time that patients feel independent. And they may purposefully switch their sleep schedule to sleep during the day so that everyone else around them can do the things that they need to do. And when they're feeling restless and activated, they can pace around the house and do things and be independent. And so I always check in with patients. Do you like staying up all night? Are you doing this because it provides you some independence and less, you feel less burdensome to your loved ones during the nighttime? If that's not the case and they want to sleep during the night and they want to participate with their family and loved ones and friends during the daytime, then we talk about how we can treat insomnia and restlessness. And unfortunately, some of the medicines also cause these symptoms. And so it's a little bit of a balancing act. I'd say it can be common, but there could be underlying reasons why patients are spending the evening as their waking hours. I'd say specifically medicines that I typically use are antipsychotics, so olanzapine or Zyprexa being the biggest one at bedtime, can help with chorea. It's also quite sedating. It targets lots of different receptors in the brain and can help with some good restful sleep. I'd say low doses of melatonin are also a good recommendation, but if patients are having things like nightmares or concerning or cognitive related dreams, they can be worsened with things like melatonin or mirtazapine, Remeron being another sleep aid that we use often. And so I think just trying to figure out what the sleep disturbance truly is and how we can best target it is an ongoing process, I'd say, for a lot of the patients I see.
It's really interesting with HE. My husband we would go to a restaurant like IHOP, right? Because he loved sugary pancakes. The more sugar, the better. And so he would order and he'd get up and then he'd sit down. And then he'd get up and then he'd sit down. And he was so brilliant. Even like when all of this was going on, Katie is noticing, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I knew he didn't have to go to the bathroom. And he'd get up and he'd walk to the bathroom and then he'd sit down. And then even if he would eat, he'd take a couple of bites and get up. So this was in the beginning of the day. And so finally he told me, he was like, I can't sit still. I don't know why. I just can't. Doesn't matter what medications we tried, what therapies, didn't matter. He couldn't. So we just learned, I would just sit there and eat and he would stand up and people would stare at us. And I'm like, what are you looking at? Like, he has to get up, whatever. So you get up, sit down. And that was just our routine. That was our normal. One thing I think is it can disturb nights when you're trying to sleep if you have work and children in the home, of course. But I really think like for these little symptoms that happen, to stop doing the stuff you doing and they like doing, don't do that. If your loved one keeps getting up and not moving in a restaurant, keep going to a restaurant. And everyone else around you, you don't know them, it doesn't matter. So don't worry about what they're looking at or thinking because they don't matter. So I had to plug
Big
that a
time.
little bit.
I
Very
100%,
good advice.
I 100% agree. I say just be unapologetically you, right? And if it just relieves how you're feeling and it's not disturbing anybody, like who cares what anybody around you is thinking or feeling or experiencing? And the nighttime stuff, like Dr. Donath said, sometimes it works for a family and sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't work for the family, like we absolutely need to address it. But if it works because you reverse that sleep-wake cycle and then it's okay. You don't always have to target things, right? You don't always have to treat things. You can let things be if it's working.